I'm Andrea Butcher, and this is Being at Work. Being a leader is hard. So on this show, I set out to talk with experienced leaders to learn from their pivotal moments, how they led through the challenges we can all relate to but are often unheard. Today's story comes from Trey Willis. I first met Trey many years ago when he was a senior director of a product management group at CenturyLink. Trey's one of those leaders who pushes himself and others to be their best. He has high expectations and a driver mentality, and yet at the same time, he cares so much about the people that he works with. That was apparent in working with him when I saw him go through a process of clarifying his personal leadership philosophy and his personal values. In our conversation, Trey shares a pivotal moment in his career that changed, well, everything. Take a listen.
I've spent the majority of my career in technology specifically, and only recently made a bit of a change in industry, which was scary. But I would say in those instances, I've learned to kind of trust your experience, be confident in what we've learned along the way, and certainly wanted to say that I'm thankful for some very outstanding mentors in my career. As I look back and reflect, there's a handful of those folks that I've picked up along the way, and encourage folks to find those folks that are meaningful, that you connect with, and they can teach you along the way. And I know I owe a good portion of my success and the experience and the lessons that they've taught me. Those things that they shared with me personally and professionally. And I'm certainly very thankful for many of those folks that I've run into along the way there as well.
Good reminder of those trusted advisors in our lives and how important those people are. Is there a pivotal moment you can think of when you kind of let down that guard a bit? And what was that like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's clear as day for me, that particular moment that you mentioned. I'm a football player. I'm an athlete, lifelong athlete, and have been coached all my life. And some of the things that come along with athletics are things like being tough and persevering and not letting your weakness show and things like that. And I found success in those things and those characteristics. And so they resonated with me. They meant a lot to me. Certainly those experiences in athletics and on the football field at the collegiate level have shaped me and have certainly molded me into the person that I've become as deeply as any other experience in my life. But as you mentioned, being real and trying to be a learner, there were lessons that I had to continue to be open to, and feedback is a really, really critical element there. Real feedback, even when it's hard, is important. And so I try to always be aware and paying attention to those things. But into the real context, the question that you asked, there was a very specific experience, kind of a fork in the road, if you will, for me. It was several years ago. I attended a leadership workshop that was put on by my business. It's called a Leadership Challenge. And you were actually the host of that particular session there. There were a number of meaningful exercises in that particular experience. And it probably had something to do with a really good workshop, a very good instructor, but also, right place and right time in my life and in my career. As I reflect on that situation, I was kind of a young, aspiring leader. I wanted to be very focused on getting the job done. I thought that's how we needed to do everything all the time. And I still think those things are true. But the one exercise at this particular point in my career and time in my life that had the most profound impact on me personally was one that's just kind of acutely called the values exercise. And in this particular workshop, the authors say the goal here is really to understand what are your personal values, and the reason that you want to understand them deeply and concisely is so that you can be more authentically you. And then to put a point on it, to demonstrate or to garner that leadership credibility, you really need to be as clear and as consistent as possible in your everyday communication and everyday behaviors as a leader, so that the folks around you understand who you are and what are your guiding principles for how you operate. So, so I listened to that, and I said, yep, I know how to do that. I'm leaderful. I'm prepared for this exercise. But as we prepared for, to kind of get this thing run, to give you a context of the exercise for those of you who haven't done it before, the instructor gives you a deck of cards, kind of like it looks like playing cards, picture playing cards. And each of them has a word on it that represents a value or a characteristic, like something like achievement or health or humor, for example. So I'm looking, kind of flipping through this deck of cards as I prepare to get ready to do the exercises we're preparing. And I asked the question. I asked the instructor. I said, "Hey, Andrea, are these our personal values or are these our professional values? And the whole challenge is kind of teetered on who you are and really being authentic and real and representing yourself. But I knew, as you mentioned, I knew how to kind of protect myself. I knew how to be strong, and I knew I had defense mechanisms so that I wouldn't let the personal stuff get in the way of accomplishing the mission, or executing the goal at work. I knew how to create that barrier, kind of that thick exterior there. And so I asked just to make sure I did the exercise the correct way. I said, are these our personal or professional goals? And Andrea says, is there a difference? And I said, well, sure. Of course there is. I'm at work. I'm this highly focused, kind of very execution oriented, no nonsense, hard driving kind of guy. I thought that was the role I played at work, was to get the job done at all costs, get the job done. And at home, I'm different than that, right? I'm a dad. I'm a father, kind of a lighthearted guy, pretty jovial, love humor, love to laugh and make people laugh. I'm pretty chill individual. And then you say, Andrea says, should there be a difference? And just leaves it at that. And it's kind of like this mic drop. And I don't know that she actually dropped the mic, but this seminal moment of this workshop for me. And I said, oh, wow. Okay. I've been thinking about this in a very narrow perspective. Let me open up my perspective for a second and just see what happens. And so I took the feedback, I took the context, I took the feedback, and I accepted the challenge there. And to this day, that particular exercise is still the most impactful leadership realization that I've actually faced or confronted in my life. I took that question head on. I took it seriously and pursued that exercise in that way.
So you've got this moment now of, wow, I've got values at home, I've got values at work, and this Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing is happening. What did you do with that? You've had this realization. So then what, Trey? What'd you do with it?
Yeah, I started the question. Started the question a lot. One, what's important to me? Two, am I doing it wrong? Am I short-sighting these other people? Relationships have become very, very important to me now, but at the time, I don't think I really understood how valuable human-to-human interactions really are and can be. And when you talk about leadership, there's a part of, at least a good part of leadership is finding ways to motivate, encourage, inspire, and really drive people to bring out the best in them. And maybe that's for a project, and maybe that's for teamwork as we talk about being at work, so to speak, but it's also bigger than that. And so I took a moment to kind of essentially from that very moment, I took that feedback, essentially that question from you, as wisdom. As like she's challenging me because she knows that there's something better on the other side of this particular answer to the question. So I scrutinized those values cards. I really pulled them apart. I don't know how many there are, but it's roughly the same size as a deck of playing cards, so probably 50. And the exercise itself says immediately separate the cards into values that are not important to you, values that are important to you, and then take the segment that is important to you and now trim that list to 5. And there are a ton of really neat words in there. As I mentioned, humor. I'm a guy that thinks humor is fun. It's a way that I connect with people. I love making people smile. But I had to decide, man, I only get 5 of these, and there's still probably 30 to pick from here. And so as I very carefully selected 5 of those cards, I then took it a step further. Is this who I really am, or is this who I want to be? Is this who I think I am, but I don't really present myself in that way? And so, I validated those. I took those cards, I took that list, I literally hand typed it out again and sent it to several, more than a couple handfuls of my closest friends and family. And I asked them, I said, hey guys, I'm doing this exercise. This is, the day after something, the workshop. But I said, what do you guys think? If I gave you this list of values, how do you think I represent myself? And in retrospect, at the time, the exercise itself had meaning for me. But as I extended the exercise for a couple of days and then a couple of weeks, and now continuing to try to live those values, which I'll share with you here in a minute. One of the most meaningful elements of the exercise for me was how others viewed me. And they gave me that feedback graciously, and I'm very grateful for that. They gave me that feedback as well. And so I was meaning to ask, was I presenting myself to them as I thought I did, or I thought I wanted to? Or was I the type of guy who did one thing and maybe really lived another way? And just the coolest part of that in return was literally all of the feedback that came back was at least 80% accurate. 4 out of the 5 was exactly the same as the 5 that I picked. And so I felt really at peace with that. And I said, this is really who you are. And so then we hit the go button. Just be that guy. You don't need to be Jekyll and Hyde. Just be the guy. People seem okay with that guy. And so, Trey, you need to be okay with that guy all the time. And it just created a ton of opportunity for me to be more authentic, more genuine, let people in, created a level of vulnerability, if you will, but also a much faster path towards trust. And then again, if you take that back to work, it continues to provide value and really enables and even encourages deeper, more real connections and relationships and ultimately communication in every action. So teams form faster and projects get done more effectively without some of the other noise that comes with trying to figure out some of the subtleties in communication. Those become much easier to deal with, if you will.
You mentioned earlier, right, the right place at the right time. I've facilitated that exercise with thousands of leaders, and from a lot of guys, I kind of get this, what are we doing? What do you mean? Values cards. And so your level of vulnerability and the courage it took then to own, like, hey, this exercise was awesome, and give me some feedback. And like, was there anyone in your asking for feedback that rolled their eyes, that was like, Trey, what are you doing? Like, what was that like for you?
So thankfully, I don't think I had any of those kind of awkward reactions of like, this is weird. This is not what I would expect. I did have a lot of folks question how I got here. Like, why am I doing this now? Mm-hmm. You seem fairly grounded. You seem to know who you are. And I would agree with that particular reaction. I've never been one to not feel comfortable with who I am, at a macro level, at least. But the kind of soul searching element that it presented itself with, I think did catch some people by surprise. But thankfully, I'm surrounded by very caring and loving people who just reacted. And they said, and a couple of them, one of the cool things that happened there is a couple of them called me because I did not necessarily call people. I did send this out kind of coldly, if you will, and just said, hey guys, I'm doing this thing. Will you help me? Without a ton of context. And I got a couple of calls. I had a long chat with my sister, who's just a rad person in general. But it was a neat conversation to hear, one, what she thought about my values, but also to encourage her to think differently about some things and to think about how she presents herself both in a professional and personal workplace, because we know each other probably best of all. But it did inspire some, as an example, it did inspire some neat conversations that I think maybe encourage some other people to do to have a thought process like this and to think about how they present themselves professionally and to make sure that aligns more closely with who they really are in their heart. It's just a neat thing to think about.
Because you can feel the tension when you're not living an authentic life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So clearly the values exercise had a big impact on you, and you've referenced your values. Yeah, I'm curious how those play out in your leadership today. So here we are several years later, and you're still telling that story and the impact it had on you. So I'm eager to hear how your values show up today.
I settled on 5 of those values, and a couple of them are 2 words at a time, but honesty and integrity is 1. Faith and spirituality is 2. Strength, discipline, and loyalty round out the 5 there. And there's a couple of different angles that you can come from there. But as I think about really living those values, a couple of them are pretty obvious. So I try to conduct my life, but certainly try to conduct business in a very straightforward format. And that is not always easy to do because people will challenge you. You get in sticky spots. But if I remember to come back to my core, that drives how I operate on a regular basis. And the result of that is people use the terms with me regularly, like, you are very real. You are very genuine. And I try to be open. And even the word vulnerable comes to mind there. Faith and spirituality is something that grounds me. I'm certainly a faithful person in the traditional ways, but also in the more spiritual ways there too. Mental and physical strength leads into discipline, and then loyalty kind of rounds us out as well. And the loyalty part, the discipline and loyalty part, I think helps to make sure that I remind myself that if I expect things of people, and simple stuff like come to work on time, do what you said you were going to go do, finish the task you said you were going to go finish, I need to do those things too. And then if the loyalty element there talks about, if we have a relationship and being open and honest and vulnerable enables those relationships, you will have my loyalty. And I expect and anticipate and encourage the same thing in return. And so I think that those, just just acting like that and really, really remembering that those are really, really important things to me. I open myself up for others to demonstrate and share those types of values and those types of experiences with me, even if they aren't necessarily their core values. You can pull those values out of other people who can represent them and who appreciate them the same way. So I think, as we think about how do you get the most out of your people, out of the folks you work with, either on your team or in your peer group, I think to know them and to understand them at a personal level and understand what's important to them and how they work best is critical. But in terms of kind of bringing it back to the values, being vulnerable by demonstrating these values all the time and showing respect and appreciation for the other person and for the rest of the team through respect and appreciation, I think it goes a long way in really creating a tighter knit team, a tighter knit relationship, and helps to kind of establish that trust, establish that perspective. That's one less thing you have to deal with, because work is hard. Work is going to be challenging, and shifting goals and perspective creates some instability. So why don't we create stability through trust and loyalty here through being vulnerable and being open with one another? So that's kind of how they play out, I think, on a daily basis for me as we build teams and relationships on a regular basis.
Clearly your values, in leading with your values, and you talked a lot about helping others to get really clear on who they are. You articulated very well the impact that you've seen as a leader on that. So no doubt that continues to drive that way and that approach. I'm curious about, you talked earlier about how you've always been very driven, results oriented. How do you, and you're in, having been in technology for so long and the business you're in now that's evolving, no doubt you have a lot of pressure to perform. How do you balance the taking time to get to know people with results? We got to have results today.
Yeah. That's a great question to think through. So how do you balance it? So the first thing is, I believe it's really, really important to understand your working team, understand what's important to them, and as I mentioned before, how they work best. Because I think as you're really thinking about at a leadership level, as you're thinking about a team and finding your strengths as a team and learning how to consider the whole and play to those strengths while mitigating any weaknesses or lesser strengths, if you will, I think it's important to prioritize. As importantly as getting results is to set the stage. I think that's part of the planning process itself, is to understand who the key players are and who the larger extended team is going to be, so that you can take best advantage of those scenarios, the situations that present themselves throughout the project, if you will. I do think that consistency and keeping a team together and that loyalty element, even that I talked about a moment ago, helps. So if you can build a strong team that plays well together, that stays together for a while, I think you have an investment in those people that you've made early and in those relationships that you made early that will continue to pay off for a long, long time. But I also don't think that you can have significantly positive results over an elongated period of time without making that investment at all. So I would just say, in summary, prioritize it. Prioritize getting to know those folks and understanding the team and creating a real, at least a loose personal relationship, so you know what's important to those folks, and then that will continue to benefit the leader and I think the rest of the team for a long time. I think if the leader knows that, or you can be a connector of people as well, and so even if it's not a direct one-on-one relationship between the leader and the person on the team, if you will, the other people on the team, the leader can be the connector since you learn to know those people so well, and even encourage better results, better collaboration. You can help to skip through some of the formalities at the beginning and get people right to the heart of executing even more efficiently. So I think it's time well spent, and it can definitely be an accelerator in achieving those results if you apply the priority at the right place.
Well, as we wrap up, Trey, I have one final question for you, because no doubt our listeners can relate to the things that you have shared today. Prioritizing getting to know your team, being in situations where you feel like you're not showing up authentically, there's tension there. What advice would you give to any leader who feels that tension of, I'm not quite showing up as the person that I am? you went through a process where you clarified, like, this is my leadership philosophy, and wherever I go, I'm taking that with me. So what advice would you give others in doing that work?
I would start with really seeking out and accepting feedback. I think that's probably the most critical thing that I've grown into and continue to work on a regular basis. Accept feedback as an opportunity for growth. That's hard. And we're humans, and we have we have feelings, and we have emotions, and we have perceptions and things. But what's really important, I think, in creating a relationship and a meaningful one that can move things forward in a direction of executing, is to understand that your beliefs, your perceptions, your context on the world isn't the only one that's there. And there's real truth in the saying that perception is reality. And so it's important to ask for that feedback from a number of different sources and ask, how am I presenting myself? How do you feel about that situation? What could I do differently to help, resolve, address, or prepare differently for another situation? And then really analyze and digest that other feedback, because that other perspective is as important to your audience, your team, the other person, as real life. Well, even if you don't believe it to be quote unquote true, perception is indeed reality. And so I think asking for feedback is probably the critical way to say that, Andrea. It's just, you got to go get it. A lot of people are going to be hesitant to share it with you, particularly in an elevated position or leadership position. They don't want to tell you that stuff. But by creating those relationships, investing that time earlier, you'll create an element of trust. And by being vulnerable and open, people will be more willing to share that with you. And then all of a sudden you have a gold mine of information on how you're perceived, how you present yourself. And then it's up to you to do what you will with that, to adjust and to be the best you can be.
Oh, Trey Willis, you are a superstar, my friend. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for sharing so openly your story. I have several key takeaways. I think as I've listened to you over the last few minutes, just this feeling of humility, in everything you've said, from asking for feedback, taking the time to do the work, prioritizing other people. It's humility, humility, humility. So you dropped your guard, you were open to the possibilities, and now you're living that out. You've got 5 core values that clearly you're demonstrating. We've seen those through this conversation. So thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Likewise. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story with you. But likewise, thank you for the opportunity to have presented me with a situation, presented me with a challenge that forced me to really think about that, so I could take down that exterior, drop my guard, and just be me.
Well, it's all you. You get the credit because you did the work. If our listeners want to connect with you, Trey, what is the best way for them to do that?
Sure. I'm open to any number of ways to communicate. The easiest way for me that I use regularly is just email. You can email me at trey.willis@gmail.com. You can also catch me at Twitter at Trey Willis. Those are probably 2 pretty easy ways to catch up with me there.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to never miss a Being at Work story.